Very cool. Sir Peter Beck, Adam Spice, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time and continuing to engage with our retail community and sharing your knowledge and insight. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, our pleasure.
All right, so to kick off some questions, first of all, congratulations on an amazing quarter. We were all very happy to hear all of the great news, especially the newest acquisition. I think the future is definitely very exciting. So congratulations to both of you and the whole Rocket Lab team.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, no, it was we're pretty happy with the quarter, eh? It was a good one.
Great quarter.
Mm.
Pretty big milestone, getting over $200 million in revenue in a quarter. That's when I look back, this actually May is my 8th anniversary of joining Rocket Lab, which was a
happy anniversary.
Pretty revenue. Thank you. To go from zero to a couple $100 million quarter is pretty epic. So
yeah,
it's good.
No kidding.
That's
when
exciting.
you joined Rocket Lab, it was literally zero per quarter.
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
Pre-revenue.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of things have changed. Some things still remain the same. You know, when I joined, remember the original office building that in New Zealand here, where Pete had everybody shoehorned into a really, really small space, where it's literally like seating was like on an airplane, where literally if somebody had to get up and go to the bathroom, everybody out to get out of the aisle, to let that person have to go to the bathroom, and then same thing when they came back. So we still keep things very tight when it comes to, facilities utilization and stuff, but some things never change.
I hate real estate. I hate the expensive real estate. So we maximize all of that.
Yep.
Nice. Difficult to believe as frugal as you come off.
Trusted.
I think it would be a hard call to work out who's tighter between Adam and I.
Oh, you're tighter.
No,
Yeah.
you reckon?
It must be pretty rare for the CEO to be more frugal than the CFO.
I'll take it. Makes my job a lot easier.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Cool. Well, if you don't mind, we'll kind of lead into some questions. I figure we kind of break things somewhat structurally between the launch. So we'll kind of kick things off with Electron, go into Neutron, and then go into some space systems, and then maybe ask you guys some interesting questions at the end. So I wanted to kind of start with a bit of a rumor. We always like to put on a bit of a tinfoil hat on Rocket Lab Weekly. So several months ago, we heard a rumor floating around about an Electron launch being signed that was hosting a 500 kilogram payload. Now, we obviously didn't put much weight into this rumor for obvious reasons, but then recently, it was on the StockTwits podcast, there was a mention of HASTE being able to lift up to 1.5 tons, which is in contrast to the 700 kilogram capacity hosted on the website. So I assume that the discrepancy between the 700 kilograms versus the 1.5 tons is a bit of a mix of, payload size, speed, fuel requirements, and whatnot. But Peter, is there anything you can speak to in terms of this rumored 500 kilogram Electron lift? Is it that April Fool's Electron Heavy from a few years back?
No. I mean, the standard lift for a orbital Electron is around about that 320 kgs. So that's right. HASTE can do 500 kgs, no problems at all. And the 1.5 ton HASTE, that's like the theoretical structural limit of the vehicle. So in some of those heavier missions, we actually put carbon straps on the interstage and some of those areas, some of the unpressurized areas, just to allow for that extra kind of bending moments and loads. But the 1.5 ton is the theoretical structural limit of the vehicle. 700 kgs is like we don't have to do anything to the vehicle. It's just a standard Electron. But also, once you get over 1.5 tons, then the performance, the hypersonic performance, starts to really drop off as well. So there's no kind of conspiracy theory here. They're just numbers depending on different outcomes.
That's fair. And it sounds like HASTE is going to have quite the year, judging by what was mentioned on the call.
Yeah. HASTE is a really solid product for us.
So you guys sold 31 Electron contracts in the last quarter, which is amazing. I hope I have my numbers right. It's 4 a.m. Here. Mm-hmm. But if we extrapolate that out, it's like 120 launches in a year. This was a little bit touched on the earnings call that you guys have a 50, like a week, like the factory was made for 1 Electron a year. And you said that it would be pretty nominal, pretty small investments to actually get up to that level. But if you guys see sustained demand for Electron, what would it take to come into like a 70, 80, 90 launches per year? Or do you ever see that happening?
Well, I mean, it just comes down to the market demand. I mean, as Adam mentioned on the call, the hypersonic capabilities and demand, from the US is strong. There's a whole bunch of other countries that are looking to do the same thing. And I think if we had to increase production, then the production process is really well defined and really mature. So it's just adding workstations and production lines. So it's not a huge lift at all.
Yeah, I mean, most of the
Awesome.
hypersonics missions, like all the hypersonics missions to date, have been launched out of the US. And so, it would require flexibility from some of those customers to be able to launch out of New Zealand, or we'd have to create some launch capabilities elsewhere. Because right now we're licensed to launch, I think it's a dozen times out of Wallops for Electron.
Yeah.
I mean, we're confident we could increase that to a higher rate, but, I don't know if we could, if you're talking about many dozens of launches, it would take probably another pad, just like we have multiple pads.
Yeah,
in,
you'd
in
want
New Zealand.
2 pads.
Yeah. But the demand is certainly strong. I mean, as you mentioned, I think this year probably about 5 or so launches are going to be HASTE launches out of the street right now has a forecast. The ranges of roughly between 25 and maybe 28 launches is kind of where the estimates are. And so we're looking at 20% or so of those being HASTE, which is come a long way from zero just a few years ago. But it's always been something that we've been pretty excited about, and it's now just coming into focus.
I have like a naming convention question, and it kind of relates to Electron and all the products really in the Rocket Lab ecosystem. So you named the small rocket Electron, the medium rocket Neutron, and the spacecraft Photon. What happened to Proton? Should we anticipate that a proton is still to come?
Well, the Russians took that already.
Yeah.
So
Right?
there's a vehicle called, yeah. So
I
no,
kind
we
of figured
can't.
that.
They would get super confusing if we started calling things protons. Yeah, but we love our subatomic particles, and we'll keep naming stuff after them for sure. A little bit geeky like that.
I like it.
Pete, you have a innate ability to break down concepts into a rudimentary way so people can really comprehend and digest. How feasible are data centers in space? Do you believe dealing with customers like Star Cloud is closer than reality than people are really giving credit for? I know I personally was skeptical, 6 months to a year ago when people were starting to bring this up. And so it'd be interesting to hear you with your experience and obviously the recent partnerships that you've been signing.
Yeah, so I think that undoubtedly there will be some data centers in space, because it makes a ton of sense for kind of sovereign and strategic reasons. I mean, you just think about, there's requirements for hardened data centers down here on Earth, and so one obvious solution to that is to put them in orbit. It's pretty hard to tamper with something when it's in orbit. So I think for a number of strategic and security reasons, there will be data centers in orbit. Now, I'm not sure if I'm ready to subscribe to the all compute is going to leave the planet and go into space, because I think for that to happen, it's purely an economic kind of judgment. And if you fix the current electricity price on Earth and the current efficiency of compute, and then you float the constraint of launch cost, and you assume that changes by an order of magnitude or so, then you can kind of squint and say, yes, data centers in orbit are the obvious solution. They're all going to go to orbit. But I mean, this is purely an economic decision. And if you just tweak those knobs a little bit, and say that, okay, electricity prices on Earth decrease and efficiency of compute increase, then I think the economics of putting everything into orbit, it becomes far more challenging. But nevertheless, we've certainly got $1 each way. So if it turns out that I'm wrong there and all compute goes to orbit, then we've got plenty of irons in the fire and great products to be able to support that.
That's good. And speaking of irons in the fire, yeah, 7 new products that you guys were showing today in the call, and also potentially Adam can answer on this piece. I know there's a lot of people out there, talking about Spectrum, and I know you answered a question on the call today about Spectrum. You guys are obviously focusing on laser terminals. Do you believe there's a recency bias for people wanting to continue in the spectrum world and spend so much in the spectrum world? And do you think people are really downplaying laser communications? And if you think so, what do you want those people to know?
Yeah. No, that's your question, Adam.
Like I don't know. I think that there certainly is I'd say it seems like a land race right now to get spectrum, right? I think people are assuming that things are going to continue to be done the way they have been done historically. Are there things that could be done, in a very different way that kind of get around the constraints that spectrum ownership currently dictate? It's possible. I've heard rumor, throughout. I spent 25 years in the semiconductor industry before coming over to Rocket Lab, and so I still kind of keep my ear to the ground there. And there's rumor that people are working on some pretty interesting things that could make unlicensed spectrum bands usable, for things that now require spectrum. So yeah, I mean, and never underestimate the progress that can be made by these clever folks in the semiconductor world, in managing the RF signal chain in such a way where they could get, amazing things to come out of it. So it's possible. It certainly is possible. I think it seems like that's a bit of a ways out there. And, we've got some very smart people who are making spectrum buys at the moment, right? We're betting that kind of the current way is going to continue. I mean, for us, I mean, we've been very clear that, ultimately we want to be in the constellation, we want to own our own constellation, operate and generate the recurring revenue from that. What we haven't said is like, what does that application look like? Because not all applications are the same when it comes to need for owning spectrum and so forth. Obviously there's applications, in things like, Earth observation don't require spectrum ownership. There's likely, even communications type of applications for, government customers that wouldn't necessarily require you to own the spectrum. You could basically leverage spectrum that's already owned. So I think it's an open area, but certainly something that we spend a lot of time thinking about, because clearly, our whole end-to-end space strategy and mission is yet to be fulfilled, right? We're picking off the pieces as we go along. Launch being, we think, the most difficult one to master, is one that we've gotten, pretty far along on with Neutron. We'll have everything that we need. And then on the space system side, you see us continually chipping away at all the really key fundamental technologies. And again, we mentioned on the call today, not all of those have been solved, by buying things. We develop things internally. So I think that degree of freedom, because we have such a strong engineering culture, allows us to really kind of not be intimidated or kind of get pushed down one path versus another. I think everything's on the table every time we make one of these decisions. And hopefully that continues to be the case.
Thinking of like moon landers, especially with the Motiv acquisition fresh in mind, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman recently mentioned that he wants landers hitting the moon's south pole on a monthly cadence starting at the beginning of 2027. With Rocket Lab's extensive know-how, and now with Motiv in your tool belt as well, paired with the proven flight software that took Firefly's Blue Ghost to the moon last year in 2025, how difficult would it be for Rocket Lab to pivot into moon landers? Like, I'm sure it's not just a matter of, slapping some legs on an Explorer bus or something like that, right? Is it how much of a pivot would that be, especially with Motiv now in house?
I mean, at the risk of sounding arrogant, because landing on any other celestial body is not trivial, but I have high confidence that if we decided to do that, we would absolutely do that. We have to view it in the context of where is that taking us into what area, and I guess we've kind of shied away from these kind of traditional programs because they tend to be somewhat unstable. They change around with different administrations, and then you go into the moon, then you go into Mars, and then back to the moon, and then so on and so forth. So we feel the better play. Better place for us to play right now is to provide all of this stuff to these guys, and if it turns out to be an interesting market that has some longevity, then you can bet your ass we're in there. But right now, I think we're probably better placed to support others, and yeah, I mean, I don't think that's how I see it. I don't think it's it.
Yeah, no, I don't think we've ever looked at that market as being a huge TAM. And it's all about growing ourselves into increasingly large TAMs. I mean, as you can see, kind of the trajectory of our revenue growth. I mean, to move the needle, we got to do increasingly large things. And that doesn't feel like the most obvious next large thing for us to do. Although, as Pete said, from an engineering discipline perspective, I have no doubt that we could do it if we chose to go kind of bite that off. But yeah, it doesn't seem like it's the next best thing for us.
That's a pretty Mars-shaped answer, if you ask me.
Well, even for Mars, I think we're trying to be pretty selective, right? I mean,
Yeah, totally.
We're making a play for the MTO opportunity, which could be meaningful and exciting and everything else. But I think, I don't think you've ever seen, in the 8 years I've been here at Rocket Lab, we've not had the kind of the obsession to just go to Mars, to think about colonizing things and kind of have these big grandiose ideas, because everything here has got to be commercial. I mean, that's the one thing I think it's pretty unique about Rocket Lab, is everything that we do is commercial. Pete's got, you got your Venus thing, which is, I would say you're one exception. Even that you're funding yourself.
Yeah.
So as a corporation, we stay very, very, very tight to, how do we make money? How do we make more money, and then more money after that?
Beautiful.
I have a follow-up question regarding, since we are on the topic of Mars a little bit. Is that okay, Scott? Oh, Scott left.
Sure, go ahead.
Take that as a yes.
So my question is, and it's touching a little bit on the newest acquisition, and I hope you can, lend a little bit of light into that. But looking at the three founders for Motiv, you have a CEO who was the Mars Phoenix and Curiosity robotic arm work expert. You have a VP of Ops who worked on the Mars Pathfinder, Cassini, and I think every major Mars rover robotic arm program that there is. You had the VP of Business Dev, who spent 11 years at JPL designing extreme environment motion control for rovers. So collectively, they've touched essentially every major U.S. Mars surface robotics program over the last 25 years. You layer that onto Rocket Lab's existing Mars portfolio, your Mars, your Escapade twins, your components on Insight, Perseverance, Ingenuity, and your very vocal and active MTO or MTN bid. And it starts to look like a deliberate Mars consolidation play. Is the strategy to dominate U.S. Mars heritage regardless of which specific NASA Mars contract you win? And does owning Motiv change your Mars pitch?
That's a great question. So I think, well, it definitely changes the Mars pitch a little bit, because we've brought, as you point out, incremental experience and capability on board for sure. And I think going back to what Adam said previously, it's like we're very focused on the commercial opportunities, and the MTO is a great example of what we believe to be a really commercial opportunity. I mean, if you think about anything that goes to Mars, whether it's humans or infrastructure or landers, needs comms. So it's not like we've chosen one really narrow, unique, specific niche to go down. It's like, well, no, everything that goes there needs comms and needs comms relays. So, that's kind of the fundamental infrastructure for anything on Mars. Now, I mean, I think everybody knows I've got a little bit of a soft spot for planetary sciences, and we always have, one cool mission in the clean room at any one time. And I think that's important for a number of reasons. I mean, they obviously have to be commercial, they have to be strategic, but also it's great for the team. Like, everybody wants to work on or be part of any Mars missions and things like that. It's great for recruiting. It's great for morale. So, having a NASA meatball on something that's going to Mars in the clean room, we just try to always have something like that. But to Adam's point before, it has to be commercial and strategic.
And I think you take that a little further. I mean, the one thing that I focus more on with this Motiv deal is I don't really even think about Mars and robotics as much. I thought in the context of what was really interesting and attractive for me is that, just like we acquired PSC back in 2021, Planetary Systems Corp, that does the separation systems, you can have a great rocket, you can have a great satellite. If you don't deploy the spacecraft properly, the mission's lost, right? And so we wanted to control that risky element of the mission. And so very similarly here, we get SATAs, right? So we get these solar array deployment mechanisms where, we've all seen satellites that fail to deploy their solar or their antennas, and you've got a botched mission. Now we've further just de-risked that, and it allows us to sell more bundled solutions to our customers that already buy solar solutions from us, and now they can buy the solar plus the SATAs and so forth. So for me, there's a very clear commercial kind of focus point for me. So I think the Mars stuff, to all things Pete said, super interesting, very sexy, very motivating for the team. But for me, it just kind of further fleshes out kind of how we just can put this whole platform solution together for our customers and de-risk their missions and ultimately de-risk our own missions going forward when we own the infrastructure that we're going to build.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
when we took over Celero, they would do a cell and a panel, and then now we can do a cell, a panel, an array, a hinge, a gimbal, everything. So a complete power solution right down to a battery even. So the SATAs that Adam's talking about were one of the last elements of that power chain, if you will.
so does the Motiv acquisition solve the SATA's supply bottleneck for your own spacecraft production, or is it the robotics capability the bigger price?
No, it's both. It's both. I mean, the SATAs, that's definitely an important device, an important piece, but also, and the thing is that if you can build a robotic actuator that can survive in Mars, and then you go to that same team and say, hey, we've got this wing in low Earth orbit, can you build an actuator? It's really not that much of a challenge. So you start off with a team that can do anything, and then you ask it to do simple things, then it generally works out pretty well.
And as a Canadian, I'm not thrilled that you're moving in on the robotic arm space, but I'll give you a pass on that one. But I figured I'd touch on Flatellite. There was a really big announcement, and I haven't heard too much since then. I was just wondering if you could maybe give a little status update. You still kind of building production capacity for that, or where things stand?
Yeah, I mean that's obviously our high volume spacecraft platform, and there's a team that's beavering away on that to make sure that that is a product that's ready for prime time when it's time.
I was also wondering if you could give us a little bit more info on the new silicon solar cells. What makes them super unique? I felt like that kind of didn't get the attention it deserved, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, well, we looked at firstly at mega constellations, and just about every mega constellation uses a silicon cell, and obviously we're the team is world experts in super high efficiency cells, and that's all great. But one of the biggest challenges with the silicon cell is obviously their efficiency is lower, but actually the number that really matters is their efficiency at end of life, and this is where silicon really falls down, because at end of life their efficiency drops right off a cliff. So that forces you into really large arrays, because you have to, when you design a solar array, you have to account for the performance at the end of life, not performance at the beginning. So you either need really large arrays or really short lifetimes. So, and this has been one of the challenges with silicon all along, and one of the reasons why other substrates are used. So we set the team a task is like, okay, how do you avoid that that kind of really disastrous end of life number, and that's the problem we set them to go and solve, and they went and solved it. So like anybody can go and grab a silicon roofing tile and say it's good for space, but actually the nuance of that is the radiation damage, and getting a number at end of life that is kind of makes a constellation make sense.
Can I have a follow-up on this one?
Mm-hmm.
I was recently visited by a subscriber who actually has a German solar cell manufacturing startup, and he was telling me a little bit about. He said somehow that currently the math is not mathing if you want to build like a giga constellation from the current silicon technology, and he said that there's a lot of R&D going into like maybe getting the kilowatt price below 100 to maybe $80 per kilowatt for like full arrays. And I was wondering, like, how do you see this dynamic in the market with the cells? Like, are you researching still how to make a cheaper product, or you're happy with what you have currently on the market?
No. So the design objective to the solar team was obviously the high performance, but also the most absurd price that they can manage. So they're definitely looking into other substrates and other technologies that are even cheaper. But the environment of space is kind of difficult, as I mentioned before. But the other, it's like anything in space, like it's a giant engineering compromise. And if you have a low efficiency cell, then you necessitate really high, large area wings. And large area wings, if you're in low Earth orbit, of course, you still have drag. So you have a lot of drag. So then you need a bunch of EP to keep you in orbit and the right station keeping. And if you've got a bunch of EP, then you need a bunch of power to run the EP. So you need more solar cells. And you have more solar cells, you have more drag, so you need more EP, and on it goes. So then you end up raising your orbit, and you raise your orbit into up to 1,000 kilometers where there's less drag, but now you've got huge radiation. So now you've got a huge radiation, a much shorter end of life of your silicon, and on and on and on it goes. So it's not just that simple. There's many kind of levers that you have to trade here to solve that problem. So I know it's a very long-winded way of answering your question, but the answer is yes.
Okay, awesome. And do you have contact with, like, because you said that the solar cells were for space-based data centers, like you're getting ready for that, and do you have ongoing conversations with customers from this, and how do you feel that market is for this type of constellations?
Well, I think everybody would agree we're very early in that, both even as a concept. So naturally, if we're bringing a product to market, we want to bring one that's relevant. So we're not just going to create something in isolation. But we have the solar team are literally the world experts in space solar. So they know all these constraints. Sometimes I think they know too much, because a little bit of arrogance in the things you don't know is sometimes useful. But anyway, they're trying to solve this problem in the best way they can, and it may be silicon, it may be a different substrate, but at the very least, for the scale that's been contemplated immediately, we've got a lot of products that will suit that application well.
Maybe I'll hop in with a question for Adam. Just kind of curious about the recent capital raise, and the structure with the collar is kind of interesting. And also you've gone up to, a lot more cash than you ever have previously. Is that kind of, a good time for it, or what's your thinking behind some of those moves?
Yeah, I think we're focused really on making sure that we've got dry powder to really be in a position to take advantage of opportunities when we see them. We come across deals from time to time that are competitive, and sometimes we're competing with people that have much deeper pockets than we do, some of our traditional kind of space and primes in particular. So for us, we just never want to be caught flat-footed. We found ourselves in the past in deal situations where we had to go get, like, hey, the deal will be contingent on getting financing, which if you spend any time dealing with banks, you'll realize that they're never really there when you need them to be. Right. They'll only lend you money when you don't need it, not when you do need it. And even getting bridge financing can really throw a monkey wrench into the process. So we just never want to be flat-footed or caught on our heels with these kind of things. I think we've been very fortunate. We talked about on the call today that we raised money starting at like $8. Even the stock was like at $5, right? And so we did the capped call on that to get us up to $8.
Yeah.
And now we're, the cap on the most recent structured ATM is $86.11, I think was the number. So I think we've been very, very fortunate to be raising capital at increasingly attractive prices. And, hopefully, we look back at this $86 cap price on a structured call, and I'm as, remorseful about raising money at $86 than I was when we raised it at $8.
Yeah.
Right? Because I look back, and one of the things that we all beat ourselves up over here is like, it was, raising at $8 was, it was the thing to do it was the right thing to do at the time. But I was like, wow, I'm raising $8 versus $80. It's like the world has really changed for us, and I think you have to change with it. And so we're trying to be more creative, and also just, again, the old saying, if you want to be lucky, well, be lucky. It's when opportunity meets preparedness, right? And I think we've been very fortunate that we've always been very well capitalized. Right? When we look at the ability that we took the Virgin Orbit factory over in Long Beach, that might be the best deal that we ever did, right? That's what's really enabled us to really push hard and fast on Neutron. And I think we were probably a little bit I may be naive that we could have gotten to where we are now without doing a deal like that. And we just happened to have the capital on hand and others didn't. And so it put us in a really good spot to go kind of steal that asset, really. And it's been a phenomenally strategic deal. And so we look to do more of those.
Yeah, I want to kind of that. So you guys are a phenomenal team, and I don't know. I'm sure people have probably told you this before, but I look at you guys and I call you guys the Thanos of space because you're collecting all the stones that kind of rule the universe. So you guys have this beautiful, phenomenal team that continue to dance really well. The M&A pipeline kind of remains full, but you also make sure that the internal engineers, if it's something like you stated, like Gauss or whatever, that you can build in-house for magnitudes less. Like you're going to go ahead and do that. Is there any other things that have recently come through that you're like, no, we're not going to pay that. We're absolutely going to do that for way less. And then second, what else are you guys missing? I mean, you've got the robotics now. You've got so many other things. I mean, what other choke points do you guys really have to collect all the stones in the universe?
Well, I think payloads is something that we're always looking at because he who owns the payload owns the mission. So that's something we're always looking at. And definitely when we're looking at these technologies, we're certainly evaluating really closely. Could we do that for cheaper? And the answer is almost certainly every time yes, but in the timeframes that we need is very rarely no. Like Gauss was an easy one. We could definitely develop that in the timeframe we needed. But something like solar that had 40 years of R&D and investment, that would take a long time to get there.
Or Geost, right?
Or Geost, yeah.
Like all the cleared personnel, it just takes a long time to hire the right people. So a lot of times it comes down to people constraints. And I think it's Pete and I were kind of chuckling a little bit at your question because we always have the debate. It's a raging debate about where do we draw the line on buying things. And
I think it's probably the most contentious thing in the executive suite out of everything.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that people underestimate how difficult it is to integrate companies, right? Rocket Lab's got a very, very unique culture. It doesn't work for everybody. And yet we make every acquisition conform to what we do. Like when we acquire a company, like it doesn't really matter what they have done for the last 5, 10, 15 years. I mean, it's either gonna meld with what we do or it's not going to survive, right? And I think we also make these companies stand on their own 2 feet. So we have yet to acquire a business where we just turn it into internal supply. We mandate that they basically pay for themselves and sell their solutions into the merchant market, which does a couple things. It forces them to run the business from a true P&L ownership perspective. And it also puts that competitive dynamic where they're not just getting the inputs on the roadmap from what we need, but they're really getting it from the broader kind of customer set out there, which allows us to have the best thinking about what really is the next best great thing. So I think it's a virtuous cycle, but it does take work. I mean, even when you acquire a little company like Motiv is a small company that's in Pasadena, not far from Long Beach, but it's going to take work, right, to integrate that. There's the systems, the people, the cultures, the processes, everything has to come together. But I think so far we've seemed to have found a good balance where we've found the right teams at the right time for the right price, and we were able to create value out of them. But there's no such thing as a small deal. Every deal ends up being tremendously time consuming from everybody in the organization.
Yeah, I mean, even within the business units, like we call them all together, and we put together the metrics of the business, like revenue per head, and a whole bunch of metrics that we care. We just rank them, and we just show the ranks to everybody. And it's like there's a first and there's a last. Don't be the last. Mm-hmm. So there's competition even within the business units.
It's really awesome. That's I appreciate that.
It's a bit like Lord of the Flies, a little bit.
I have a follow-up. You mentioned Gauss just now, and I wanted to ask. So Gauss is really your move into high volume electric propulsion, right? Hall effect, over 200 units a year for your own needs, as I understand it so far, all in-house. Walk us through what makes Gauss different from what's already on the market. And there are some companies out there welcoming the competition. But is there any, how does Gauss stack up against the existing players?
Yeah, I mean, look, so I mean, there's lots to talk about there. So one is, I guess, the technology stack. So there's no there's different kind of shades of ion thruster, right? There's external cathode, internal cathode, heated cathode, and then automatic start. And I guess we were unburdened by any heritage development or people. So we just went straight to the state of the art. We didn't look to kind of evolve or have like I say, kind of heritage that we were kind of arrogant in the fact that we just thought we'd build the best one out there. So right from the actual architecture of the thruster through to the PPU and all the valves and all the associated equipment, we just sort of skipped to the latest design point, whereas others who have been doing it for a long time are still, various, generations of kind of evolution behind. So that's kind of on the technology. And then, we even when we were developing it, if we just were developing it for our own constellations, it wouldn't have like the same level of throttleability and the same, variance in power levels and all those sorts of things. So that team were kind of mandated to make a commercial product in that respect. And look, we know the EP market super well because we've procured from most of them or had certainly worked with most of them in various forms over the years. So we understood the market super well, and it's great to see that there's competition welcome because it's certainly going to come.
Nice.
Yeah, I have a question that I really want to make sure we fit in. So there is a SpaceX IPO around the corner, and the rumor mill has it that the valuation is going to be 1.75 trillion, and it looks like they're getting fast-tracked into the Nasdaq and S&P 500. And it's inevitable that new investors are going to look at, okay, SpaceX 2 trillion, Rocket Lab is maybe 50 billion. There's a huge gap there. What would you say to these investors? Like, do you see yourself coming up to those levels, or what would you say to these investors?
Yeah, we get this question a lot, actually. And I think that what I've noticed over the last 6 months is a huge uptick in investor interest, especially on the institutional side. And a lot of times you could just tell they're coming in to learn, really in anticipation of having to make an investment in SpaceX, just given the market cap that's going to be involved, and they're having to track the indexes and so forth. But then typically they come away with, wow, this is a little bit different than I thought, and more interested in Rocket Lab than they thought they were going to be, which I think is a good thing. I think overall, it's going to bring intelligence to the market, right? I think that, it's interesting. I've told investors before. I think actually some of you guys that are doing your coverage on the on the retail side are actually better at that than the institutional sell side analysts are. But I think what an IPO like this means is that you're going to have a lot more mind share focused on our sector, which I think is going to do two things. I think it's going to start to separate kind of the real space companies from the ones that have just kind of labeled themselves as space companies. They've got some little bit of exposure that on a very small part of the market, but they don't really have any lasting differentiated technology. And I think what's going to happen is the good companies are going to get dragged up by SpaceX, and I think the less quality names are going to get basically put into obscurity. And so you're going to have a world of haves and have-nots, I think, which is going to make investors' lives more challenging. They're going to have to do more work. And I think they're going to have to be much more discriminating, because what I've seen is a complete or almost complete lack of any discrimination amongst investors across the names that have currently been in space. So I think long-term it's going to be healthy. It's going to create a cleansing, and it's going to create a kind of tiers within the market about where the real quality differentiated players are. And of course, we think we're going to be on the right side of that. Now, as far as what the money flows involved, like where is that money going to come from to go fund $50 to $75 billion of new share issuance? I don't know. I mean, you guys might be in a better position to answer that. I don't really focus on that part of the market. We just focus on kind of where we compete. And I think, it's for us, I think it's going to be very helpful to have as close a pure play competitor as we will have seen in this market. And look, I think there's a lot to be, kind of aspirational about when you look at SpaceX. And I think that, we're doing a pretty good job trying to measure up. But, I think it's going to be overall probably a good thing. Again, long term, short term, I just don't know because I'm not that familiar with how these trades go.
Yeah, I mean, I would ask you guys. I mean, are you going to sell Rocket Lab shares to buy SpaceX?
Nope.
Unlikely.
Oh no, hell no.
Well, there you go. There you go.
My gut says maybe they come out of crypto and out of Tesla and into SpaceX more than they would come out of other quality space names like ourselves. But again, don't know.
And I myself, I'm hoping that investors are going to be like, okay, if this is true to and this is 50 billion, this has a huge runway. Okay, we're gonna buy this instead. That's what I'm hoping, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
While we're on the topic of SpaceX, I kind of want to take that and pivot more towards Neutron. So Falcon 9 wasn't originally designed with reusability in mind, but was later retrofitted to be reusable. And as one might expect, this was a fair bit more cumbersome compared to what the team at Rocket Lab are doing with their blank slate approach to Neutron being reusable from the get-go. So, Peter, you've mentioned in previous interviews that Neutron is designed to be, I think the way you phrase it is human rateable. And though the plans for human flight are a ways off, what kinds of puts and takes have there been for Neutron's design in regards to making sure that eventually it can carry humans to space?
Yeah, it's a great question, Scott, actually. So there's a bunch of things like safety margins, for example, tank safety margins, which are higher in human spaceflight than they are not in human spaceflight. But also the level of qualification that you have to do is more significant. So if you want to qualify a tank, for example, for human spaceflight, it's different than the qualification required just for normal payload delivery. So when we think about doing these qual programs, we don't want to do them twice because you've seen the giant hunks of steel out there pulling and pushing on these tanks to get them through qual, or all of the stuff to get them through qual, right? So we don't want to go back and do that because it's just like hundreds of engineers. So as we've gone through the program, we've basically qualled stuff in many cases. Certainly the big stuff we don't want to do again to human spaceflight qual levels and qual programs. So we could take the easy approach would just be scoot it all through, but then you would have to go back in time and then do all the stuff again. So and that would just suck. So as we've gone through, it's not a terrible amount of extra work to just do the odd extra test, put the odd extra load limit and stuff on there, such that when it comes through the data is there. And if you go back and ask some of the SpaceX guys about qualifying Falcon 9 for human spaceflight, they just qualled it to launch satellites. So they actually had a huge amount of work to go back, and in many cases ended up redoing a whole bunch of qual tests because the data just wasn't there. So, you do a test, and if it passes, you just move on, rather than doing all of the paperwork and all of the stuff you need to be able to present it, later on down the road as acceptable products for NASA or DoD or anybody else to certify. So yeah, that's kind of the approach we took.
Cool. And then for human spaceflight aboard the Neutron, this is going to be a very non-technical question, but is it just a matter of swapping out the second stage and then applying a capsule, or would there be again, my apologies, but like an adapter in between, or would it need its own booster? How can we look at that?
Yeah, basically, the Hungry Hippo is no longer required. Because there is no fairing, it just becomes a capsule. So, I'm not going to say it's elementary, but at least in kind of on a whiteboard, it's pretty elementary with respect to, replacing the Hungry Hippo with the capsule, and then everything else below that remains exactly the same. That's
great. Yeah, because that's one thing that stuck out to us at LC3 is just kind of looking around, you could tell yeah, you got the tanks there, but you definitely have room for, tank number 3 and number 4 there. And it seemed like everything, despite not being ready at the moment or needing to be there in the moment, was definitely thought of ahead. And it seems like human spaceflight on Neutron is no different.
Well, exactly right. I mean, you should fire me if we weren't thinking of those things, because that would be poor.
I have a fun question. I know that we had drafted some fun questions, and I know we're coming up on time soon. But Sir Peter Beck, I would say you have some pretty interesting hobbies, right? Helicopters, owning a DeLorean, rocket engines on Sea-Doos I've seen, gold mining. But Adam, one of our community members recently discovered that you are actually a co-driver for off-road racing. Is there an unwritten rule at Rocket Lab that the C-suite has to have at least one hobby that raises our blood pressure as investors?
I'd just like to comment first that I'm faster than Adam in a race car,
That's
for sure.
although you have seen me flip
It's
a
because you have the
Oh,
rocket
this
bike.
is true. This is true. This is true. Adam, we went out in a desert in off-roaders, and Adam flipped it, rolled it, and I was coming to his rescue because he was upside down on the side of this dune. And I have to admit, I was laughing so hard that I was almost unfunctional as a human because I could barely get out of the off-roader myself to come to his aid.
Yeah, that's the true story. I was a little dismayed by that, but I was hoping for more help. But I would say so with the off-roading thing. So it's actually a friend of mine who also does. He's a contractor that I work with, and he was asking if you know if Rocket Lab could help sponsor his vehicle. I'm like, well, you know, we're not quite in a positive cash flow position yet. So what I'll do is I'll personally fund you, and I'll let you put the Rocket Lab logo on the side because that attracts eyeballs. So that was good. Just to set the record straight there. And then I would say co-driver is a bit of a strong statement. I actually got strapped into the 6-way harness, and my guts were basically jostled around the mid 400 for about 2 hours. And I was asked if I wanted to take another ride, and I'm like, nope, I'm all good. I'm all good. So I never got behind the wheel, but I did fund a bit of this. It's a 1966 F100 that's been kind of retrofitted to do this crazy off-road race, but it's fun. I think we all have to find ways to kind of deal with the stress and the other excitement around a place like Rocket Lab. So off-roading is a good way to do it. I also have my own personal brewery at home in my property. I bought a place that has a 500-gallon brewery. So I know Dave is a Canadian. I actually just brewed my own clone version of a Molson Canadian, where surprise, surprise, the secret ingredient is flaked corn or cornflakes. So I've got quite a few kegs of a knockoff Molson Canadian if you ever find yourself in Southern California.
Yeah, it's not my top beer, but I'd give it a shot.
Okay.
As long as those two hobbies don't mix, your beer making and your off-roading. But that story you told Sir Peter Beck certainly is not reassuring. Please be safe out there.
Oh no, we're safe as houses.
There was roll cages.
Yeah. All strapped in. It's good to go.
Maybe I'll just squeeze in another last serious one. It sounded pretty interesting and pretty exciting, some of the stuff you were talking about Europe on the call. Sounds like you are thinking about going, a lot beyond laser terminals. Is there kind of a vision or anything you can tell us about where you think Europe might be going down the line?
Well, I think we're just practical about it. I mean, Europe is the next largest market from the United States, so we'd be remiss if we weren't in there. And with the kind of the more focus on sovereign capability, the challenge that Europe has is they just have relied on the United States so much they don't have it. So we turn up with all of these bits and pieces, and even complete spacecraft builds, that can be extremely useful.
Yeah, it really is going to be, I think, a very helpful beachhead for us to kind of establish a bigger presence there. Because before we were really on the outside looking in, as Pete said, we had great technology, and in some cases the Europeans have to buy it because they have no choice. I think once they do have choice, I think that's going to be helpful that we've got boots on the ground. With Monarch, we acquired almost 400 very talented people, and there's the ability to actually stand up production if we need to, given the fact that the technology already exists. It's just a matter of whether we make it in Long Beach, New Zealand, Toronto, DC, right? There's lots of it's that's something that can be done relatively quickly, and there's not a lot of capital costs involved in a lot of the products that we make on the space system side, unlike on the rocket business, which is all about capital costs and infrastructure. So yeah, we're pretty excited. And I think that one of the challenges that the Monarch business comes with is underutilization of a lot of very capable infrastructure, things like PCBA assembly lines and so forth, that we can really kind of hopefully leverage for broader parts of our business across avionics and other parts that could benefit from that level of automation and insourcing. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
Okay, I also want to squeeze in one last serious question. So it's also tinfoil hat time. So there was some speculation. We saw a Middle Eastern satellite broadband provider who are planning 2,800 satellite constellation. And apparently you guys are making their buses already. And we saw that they are looking for a partner. And we were thinking it would be a very interesting match if Rocket Lab maybe would jumpstart the constellation thing, and they have spectrum and everything. And this was probably speculation. I think you touched on this on the earnings call, but are you thinking about maybe going into the space infrastructure via partners, and are there ongoing discussions with any broadband providers that have maybe spectrum that you would partner together and create a constellation?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're into everything, right? So, as you'd expect us to be. So, I mean, what I would say is when there's a press release, it's real. Anything prior to that, it's just speculation.
So the Meta partnership is not happening? No, I'm kidding.
So I was going to ask this at the tail end of it, but that's good. Speaking of upcoming milestones, what are we going to do? Are we going to have a 100th launch party or a 20th anniversary party?
Wow, we're definitely having a 100th launch party. I've got something cooked up for that 100th launch. So it's going to be exciting. It's going to be good. Yeah, I don't know if we can have two parties. That sounds a bit extravagant.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. We'll certainly have one.
I'll bring the beer.
Yeah. Actually, we could save a fortune if we just ship your beer across.
We could do that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was going to talk about milestones as well, but from a financial standpoint, it's not as cool as throwing a party. But as you kind of noted, the previous way to kind of raise capital is through kind of these transactions that you've been doing, going to market, selling at the money, and hitting the ATM, as I like to call it. At what point do you think actually going to the debt markets is actually reasonable? Like, you guys have a current credit rating of BB. As you kind of become more mature, cash flow positive, it looks like it's going to be something that you guys can easily manage, right? Borrowing at 6, 7, 8% and being able to get gross margins way north of that. How are you guys starting to consider that? And is that even a topic of conversation these days?
Look, I think Pete and I are very similar, and and on the same page. We really don't prefer debt.
Yeah.
Right. Especially at this stage of a business. Yeah. There is a time and a place, and I think not all debt is created equal. But even convertible bonds at the end of the day are debt if your stock doesn't perform. Right. So we were very cognizant of that when we issued our convertible bond offering. We've been fortunate that most of that has been equitized. So we essentially don't have any leverage on the business, and we kind of like it that way.
Yeah.
But for certain opportunities to scale the business, some of those inorganic, sometimes you need to look at every source of capital, and you find the ones that are palatable. I would say that we've got the distinction now, I'm told by most bankers, that I think we might have the best performing convertible bond of all times, which, I guess that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, I guess I always like it when people make money off our financial instruments, whether it's equity or equity-like debt stuff like a convert. But the good thing is, given our market cap, our trading volumes, which are all driven ultimately by the engineering execution of the company, we have a lot of options available to us. Like, the capital markets are really wide open for us. And but at the same time, Pete and I are both very sensitive to dilution, right? We're large equity owners ourselves, and we want to make sure that we're protecting, the dilution of the business as well. So, the good thing about debt is it's non-dilutive. The bad thing about debt is that, that you got to be in a position to repay it, or else it can be very punitive and risk the entire franchise. And I think that, Pete's been very clear since I joined, he's not going to do anything that's going to risk put an existential risk on the business. And so, putting too much debt on a business, especially a young one that's still very volatile and evolving, creates an existential risk that just doesn't need to be there. We have enough risk in the technology in the markets that we play in, that we don't need to add another unnecessary layer of risk, I don't think, right now, especially when we have such access to other ways to finance the business.
I have one last question for you guys. I mean, we started with a tinfoil hat question, might as well cap it with a tinfoil hat question. So hear me out on this. I'm going somewhere, I promise. So whether we call them UFOs, UAPs, extraterrestrials, or even interdimensionals, it seems like we're on the brink of disclosure, whether that's a few weeks away or a few years away. I realize I sound like I'm talking about aliens, but Peter, in 2025, you parted ways with roughly 9.5% of your Rocket Lab ownership, which was outlined to be used in part to assist funding of a mission whose goal it is to determine if there are signs of microbial life in the clouds of Venus. So my question to you, Peter, and Adam, I'd like to hear your thoughts as well, is what are the implications that the proof of life off planet would have, not just on Rocket Lab as a company, but on the greater space industry as a whole?
Well, I mean, I should be clear. I'm not selling stock to go chasing aliens. But I guess for me personally, at least, I think, one of the biggest questions in the universe has to be: are we the only life in the universe? And this is why I was so passionate about Mars sample return, is because that was those samples are geologically important to answering that question. And if you want to take the scientific method, then as of today, we have no evidence of any other life form other than us in the universe. I don't know. It just seems like if you could answer that question and say, "Oh, yep, no, there is other life," and say it was in the clouds of Venus, then you can reasonably assume that life is pretty prolific throughout the universe. And I think I'm not sure what actual tangible outcome that has on how people act, but I still think it's a scientifically important question to answer. And if we continue to search for life in our solar system and our other planetary bodies and continue not to find it, then I think it makes the human species just that much more special. So I don't know. It's just a fascinating question that I would at least like to answer.
And I love the fact that Pete thinks about these things, because I have given zero thought to any of this stuff. The only microbial life form that I care about is the yeast that I make my beer with.
And that better be not on a different planet. You need it
Better
in
not
your
be.
garage. Yeah,
exactly. Although we did talk about making some space beer when we send Neutron up. If we can send some New Zealand hops to space and return it in Neutron, and then I'll make a batch of space beer with these New Zealand space hops, I think that will be pretty exciting. That, to me,
you can put it on the shop.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, actually, we need a liquor license.
Yeah.
Is this the Rocket Lab space infrastructure announcement that we've all been waiting for?
Beer Constellation.
Yeah.
It'll go over really well with the Canadians, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I just want to thank you sincerely for being on here with us. We continue to appreciate your willingness to engage with the retail community. I think all of us polled all of our retail members on X to see what they wanted to ask or what they wanted to say. And from what I noticed, the general consensus was that of gratitude. The retail community thanks you and appreciates all of your hard work. And, your execution is our success, and your entire team is doing a phenomenal job. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, it's very kind. I mean, we feel the same way. We thank everybody for supporting the company. Like it's an honor.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you.